So, I guess we'll start off. So, if you can tell me your name, and if you're like at a party and somebody asks you what you do, like, what do you tell them?
I tell them my name is Pete Hernandez, and I'm a graphic artist, illustrator, writer.
Awesome, awesome. They're like, I don't understand what that means, or do they usually get it?
Usually at a party, people pretend to get it. Those that really want to know will ask, like, who I've worked for, what kind of things I do, and I'll tell them I've done logos and book covers and CD covers and storyboards, and depending on the person, I might say I do comic pages, so they don't. But I guess comics are kind of hip nowadays, so it's okay to be a comic artist because they make, the movies make lots of money.
So, what's the stuff that is unique to Company Man? Like, what sets that apart from?
It would have to be the cast of characters because they're multicultural. They're from every walk of life that I can get information on. I base a lot of the characters on real people that I meet on Facebook and through my normal interactions in the real world, going to stores, walking around. So there's Latino, Black, Asian, Middle Eastern, and I try and give each character a flavor that isn't the cliche approach Marvel and DC might take. It's more like, if it's a Pakistani character, then it'll be a Pakistani who's maybe more Americanized and a bit hipper. It's just his cultural background happens to be Pakistani. Same thing with Japanese and Chinese. I might mix up characters. I have some characters that are like half Chinese, half German, half Indian, half Japanese. I just the ethnicity of it all, and putting ethnic characters into situations that would normally be populated by white characters.
Now, what do you feel? I mean, you talked about where it came, like where that idea came from, but like meeting these people in your life is what made you decide like that was an important part of Company Man?
Years ago, I had read a friend of mine was taking some psychology courses, and I was flipping through one of his books, and I read a blurb or a section of it that basically said Latinos and blacks and so forth, people from like ethnic backgrounds, are more inclined to be community oriented and to help one another than people might think, or as it appears in the media. So it got me thinking that if a Spanish kid got powers, he might be more inclined to use them to help his community based on his upbringing, or what the area was like. If the area is really downtrodden and poverty stricken, he might be more inclined to help rather than use his powers for crime, for his own benefit.
Nice. So you feel like for a Company Man, like putting it out there with all these characters will show, are you thinking about the readers when you do that, or just for you personally, that's what you wanted to do?
I try and, you have to kind of write it for yourself first, and then after it's written, maybe like the second or third draft, you start thinking about who this might appeal to. But I'm going for as broad a demographic as possible. Like, even though the characters are, Latin, Black, Asian, so on and so forth, I'm not trying to alienate white readers either. There's plenty of, American characters, Jewish, Irish, Italian, so on and so forth.
Nice. So where did, you talked a little bit about where it came from, all the heritage that you put into it, but what was the seed of some of the story and the name? Where did that come from?
It was a combination of 3 different scripts I had lying around. About 2009, a friend of mine was affiliated with a website called Comics Nexus, and they were looking to do weekly comic strips. So he asked me to come up with something and contribute, and his friend would definitely put it on there. So I have a document I keep track of where I just whenever I get a new idea, I just type it into that. So that way I'm not flipping around my hard drive looking for all these scattered plot concepts. So Company Man was 3 different plots I smashed together. There was an alien invasion storyline in there somewhere that I jettisoned along the way. And the title Company Man was a placeholder for one of those script ideas. And over the months of writing, I just couldn't come up with, like, I couldn't come up with a code name for the main character, Nick Reyes. For some reason, I just couldn't. I don't know. It was a hurdle I couldn't get over. I finally just gave up trying to give him a special buzz name and figured I would make him special by having him just use his name instead of some call sign. And the title Company Man just stuck. I figured it stuck. I figured it would be a double entendre, kind of like what they did with Daredevil. You know how Daredevil was taunted by kids and called Daredevil when he was being roughed up by bullies, and then later on he kept that name and kind of took ownership of it. So the Company Man is kind of like that, kind of like inspired by what they did with the Daredevil title.
So were there other comics and stories that influenced it?
More so movies and video games and animation than comics. Even though I love certain comic writers like Mark Waid and Brian Azzarello, and I was a big Frank Miller fan when I was a kid, but I thought I wanted to make it mainstream without making it cheesy, so sort of PG-13 as opposed to PG. And a lot of my influence were, like, visually, a lot from video games. Grand Theft Auto 3 in particular, the style of the promo art had a big influence on me. Plus my old influences like the aforementioned, like Frank Miller and let's say John Buscema Sr. and Alex Ross, and all the new guys, all the Brazilian guys and the South American guys that are drawing comics now. They all have a huge influence on me, but I wanted to make it a combination of old and new, like the old sensibilities that I developed in high school and in college, mixed with the new style and the faster, slicker, more in-your-face approach of today's video games and movies.
So what you've talked to me before about like your process, like,
Mm-hmm.
'cause you don't, I guess like most guys, they sit down, they maybe sketch out a thumbnail or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then they just go and they have this one big page. You have a really unique way of putting together your comics. Can you kind of describe your artistic process once you write the page, but now you're sitting down to draw it?
Yeah, I'll have the script open in Final Draft, and I draw on Xerox paper. So so when I'm done with a comic, it's like a stack of drawings like this. And I guess that was something from my animation days in college. Just drawing on Bristol, drawing on those big 11 by 17 sheets of Bristol, it was just uncomfortable for me. Just get the perspective, having low vision, it was kind of a hassle to lean forward and draw the top rows. And then as I went down, the perspective would get kind of skewed because I was kind of almost standing up, and then as I went down the page, I'd have to sit. So I decided to just, for my own comfort, so I can get through it faster, I just decided to draw each panel, as far as the figures in panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, on my little light board, a little 8 by 11, 9 by 12 light board, something like that. And then when I'm done with my stack, I just scan them in, and in Photoshop put them together like puzzle pieces. Then the backgrounds and the furniture and so on and so forth, I'll use photo reference and I'll draw it around my figures, when I'm done placing them all. Then I'll place the, actually even before I do the backgrounds, I'll create the word balloons and put it and copy and paste the text in and arrange it properly. Then I'll know how much background I have to work with, and I'll build the backgrounds with the blank word bubble there, just so I know, it saves me a minute or so, maybe, if I don't have to draw all the details, because it's going to be covered by a word balloon anyway.
Yeah. And does that feel like, it feels like you have a lot of discovery and flexibility with that process.
It's just like a puzzle. It's just like, it's kind of fun, even though it might be time consuming to some, or sound time consuming, or sound tedious. To me, it's fun. It's you're kind of mixing and matching, because when I have the uninked penciled characters, while I'm laying them out, I might get an idea like, oh, it would be cooler if I had this guy more, bigger in the foreground and that guy smaller in the background, and then put the furniture between them, to simulate like the multiplane field of, depth of field. And, having everything on its own layer and all these little, 20, 30, 40 pieces to mess with, it gives me a lot of freedom. I don't feel, with With Bristol board, once you draw it on there, you're kind of, that's it, you know, unless you plan on erasing it or maybe cutting up a little square and putting it on top of what you want to change and then redrawing it. And I just found that more time consuming, and you run the risk of just destroying the paper eventually. In Photoshop, I could just move them all over the place, do whatever I want to do, and not worry about anything getting ruined. If I want to experiment, I can duplicate the layer, play around with whatever I want to do to that layer, and if I don't like it, just dump it and then turn back on the original layer and start again. And it just makes it easier for me. Plus, I can't see 400%, you know, magnification on my work, but in Photoshop I can zoom it in. So if I want to get fancy and detail and an eyeball, I can just zoom it in so like the whole screen is just one eye, you know, and do eyelashes or dots in the eye or whatever, you know.
Nice.